The warrant says one officer called a complaint stupid, that the victim was a dumb Mexican C-word, and that he was going to write it off without investigating further. But there are concerns that the evidence from those private chats won't be admissible because an RCMP officer who was supposed to submit a form to the judge about the evidence within 1 year said he, quote, forgot.
Just, oh yeah, that thing.
Clean up your room.
The evidence of all the extreme racism of the RCMP officers. I forgot. Yeah. Oopsie. But, you know, better luck next time. Hopefully people find out about it on their own time, somehow. I've covered a lot of stories over the past year talking about the racism of the RCMP and also just the racism prevalent in Canada towards Indigenous folk. Everything from, you know, the forced sterilization of Indigenous women happening today, not years ago. The Senate just passed this year, 2024, you know, a passage outlawing that practice. So it didn't happen generations ago. It happened this year in 2024 is when the Canadian Senate passed that, just so anyone needs context on that. I also talked about a protest that took place. It was a residential school solidarity protest on the streets where a white racist dude driving a truck drove through multiple people, hitting a bunch of them, and he's not being charged with a hate crime. It actually took about 5 or 6 months before the police actually decided to charge him, which is also kind of disturbing. And, you know, obviously just part of this story, making it extra gruesome. And there's another one that took place years ago. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, where the RCMP beat an Indigenous chief. And there was a lot of calls at the time for the RCMP to be held accountable for this one. I'll quickly give you guys the video footage, so content warning if you've never seen it before.
Prime Minister described the RCMP video entered as evidence by the defense in the case against Athabasca Chippewan First Nation Chief Alan Adam. We're going to show you some of that video now. A warning, it's graphic and violent. Officers had stopped Adam for an expired license plate. As you can see, as you just saw in that tape, one Wood Buffalo RCMP officer approached the group while a second officer arrives and tackles Chief Adam down to the ground. Chief Adam is now facing charges of resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer.
So, I mean, you can pretty much see in the video, clear as day, that was for a expired license plate. And this was the results of the expired license plate. So, I mean, I would assume this was just pretty clear. This was certainly an excessive use of force for something that is clearly racially motivated. If you don't think it's racially motivated and you're just like, well, I mean, he did have an expired license plate. I mean, that part is true, but I haven't seen a lot of footage of, say, you know, a mother and a father of a white family who are in a truck going home, and an officer approaches them and says, hey, your license plate is expired, and then have the complete shit beat out of them. You know, I think a story like that would probably gain a lot of attention, negative attention for the police. But don't worry, the watchdog has cleared the officers. This happened yesterday. Race did not play a part. The watchdog clears officers in the arrest of the Alberta chief. Alberta's police watchdog says there's no evidence the offense was committed when the Mounties tackled a prominent First Nation chief and punched him in the face during an arrest outside of Fort McMurray, Alberta. The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team has also said the report released Thursday said that there's no evidence of racist treatment by the officers against Alan Adam, who was the chief of Chippewa First Nation for about 2 decades. Police officers' use of force in law is not to be assessed on a standard of perfection, nor using the benefit of hindsight and the opportunity to consider alternatives with the luxury of time. Under these circumstances, the use of force employed was necessary to gain control as quickly as possible to try and maintain the safety of both the officers and the others present, which, yeah, is just absolutely horrifying. In a decision released Thursday, the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team concluded the 2 RCMP officers under investigation were lawfully placed and had acted properly during the violent arrest. The written decision by Executive Director Michael Ewanson concludes there was nothing to suggest racism played a part in the encounter. They said that the ASIRT is completely broken and designed to protect the ability of police to assault and terrorize Indigenous people and other racial minorities. He said the ASIRT's reputation for absolving officers was why he did not participate or provide evidence in the investigation. Adam called the suggestion that race was not involved laughable. These incidents do not occur to wealthy white people in Alberta. Since its inception, the RCMP was designed to intimidate and control Indigenous Canadians. Nothing has changed in the 158 years since Confederation. The message to police across Alberta is clear. There is still no consequences for those who assault and murder Indigenous people. In March 2020, Adam was leaving Fort McMurray Casino with his wife and niece when an officer pulled up behind his vehicle. The truck had an expired license plate. Adam became agitated and swore at the officer. The officer called for backup. Adam adopted a fighting stance twice during the interaction, once after the officer took hold of Adam's wife's arm to arrest her for obstructing a police officer, according to the report. The officer approached Adam and took hold of his left arm and told him that he was under arrest. Adam tried to pull away and appeared to have his right hand clenched in a fist, according to the report. Another officer arrived at the scene, charged and hit Adam's upper chest, taking him to the ground. While Adam was on the ground, the second officer punched him in the head. Again, you can see how the whole thing gets spun so quickly, because that's why I wanted to show you the video footage first off. It's just pretty clear. It's someone who's in a vehicle, and then there's an officer walking towards him. He walks outside of the vehicle, and they just beat the fuck out of him. I mean, now there's obviously the story that, well, he had his fist clocked. It looked like he was about to assault an officer. He had to be subdued. We had to subdue his wife. This was all necessary, all over an expired license plate. Like the guy, like when there's stories like this, oftentimes, and even if there was, by the way, a weapon in the vehicle, and he had a prior arrest warrant and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't justify beating the fuck out of a dude in your attempt to submit him. But that's usually like the background that people will push back on and be like, Lance, this is not the hill to die on. I know you always talk about Indigenous rights and that kind of stuff, but the guy had a violent prior arrest, and he was, a domestic abuser or things like that. That's not the case here. This is a guy who had an expired license plate, and he had an expired license plate, and the police obviously were, I'm sure, showing up because of the expired license plate. I'm not saying that they were like trailing him or anything like that. That's not my assumption, but it does seem like as soon as he gets out of the car, they beat the fuck out of him. And to then afterwards, because at the time when this happened years ago, there was outrage. Even Justin Trudeau released a statement saying that he found the video footage shocking and horrifying, and a sad indictment of the prevalent racism that still exists today. And years later, because I guess the story was kind of forgotten about, the oversight institution that's made to hold police accountable decided to say, there was no racism at play here. The police officers were defending themselves. He had a clocked fist. It looked like he was about to fight them. They needed to subdue him immediately, and the beating the fuck out of him part is just necessary to make sure that he doesn't commit a violent act afterwards. The Attorney General had the most information that the ASIRT had. How could it be that the top chief enforcement officer in the province decided the charges are not warranted, but when we look at how those charges came about, the ASIRT decides that there shouldn't even be a trial? This does not enhance the credibility of the police within First Nation groups or Métis groups or minorities. He criticized the police watchdog and reiterated the need for independent investigative agencies. Police cannot effectively investigate the police because, as we see in this case, they simply cannot accept what a police officer said without question. And yeah, it's going to happen in perpetuity as long as the watchdog agency is also directly collaborating with the police themselves. It's like, do you expect them to take their word over the, video evidence in this case? Because all you really need is an officer to come forward and be like, so I feared for my life. He was very dangerous, and he was about to attack me, and he had a clocked fist, and it looked like he was potentially carrying a weapon, and so we had to do what we had to do to maintain our safety. It's the same story you hear like internationally when these kind of stories go down. It sucks. It's brutal. He is obviously entitled to his personal beliefs. However, there's nothing in the available evidence that documents any overt language or conduct by the subject officers which suggest that this was racist treatment. This also came out this year. RCMP officers made atrocious, racist, sexist comments, says an internal.
An officer at this RCMP detachment described the behavior of a dozen of his colleagues as atrocious, telling his bosses about harassment and text chats on police computers and private devices. A search warrant that is part of an internal investigation obtained by CBC News details one officer allegedly bragging in a private chat about using his taser on people who were black and they were unarmed, and in another chat saying, "I just racially profile pulled over a car." And the warrant details in-person conversations too, with an officer accused of saying Indigenous members of the community all have fetal alcohol syndrome and that they wouldn't go to the reserve because we're not going to help those people.
It's absolutely unacceptable. It's not a culture we expect or accept anywhere, frankly.
BC Solicitor General in charge of policing says he was briefed this morning.
There is a full internal disciplinary process underway, and I expect that will be thorough.
You can't reform this. I got to be honest with you. And I know that's the argument that keeps being put forward. Like, well, okay, a few bad apples. A couple bad apples, right? It's not as if all of the officers themselves are extreme racists. You know, I mean, these were fucking the statements you would expect to hear from Klansmen. But no, they're just, we're obviously disgusted, horrified even, that these officers would say those things in internal chat logs, and, that they say openly that they're racially profiling people they pull over so they can taser unarmed black people, or that they think that all Indigenous people have fetal alcohol syndrome. Yeah, no, we get it. That's bad, okay? So we're as disgusted as you are, and we're doing internal investigations. We're going to find out who did this. We might not release the names and make them public, but we will make sure that they, of course, are disciplined. What that will be a matter for us to decide. Could it be that they are suspended without pay for a couple weeks? Could it be that they're sent to good cop school? I don't know. But, like, the few bad apples thing, I hope everyone knows, the full saying is a few bad apples spoil the bunch, as in, like, if you have a couple extreme racists, if you have a couple Klansmen police officers, then it destroys the entire institution itself. And the same thing applies to, police institutions globally. You're always hearing about how, like, yes, the only time that a bad cop gets to exist is when good cops say nothing. Well, more often than not, good cops, if they exist, say nothing or do nothing out of fear of the other bad cops, because there's so many of them. And I'm not trying to say all this to say that, like, there isn't within impoverished communities, especially sometimes, people who depend on the services of the one police branch that lives in a small community in, say, like the Yukon or something like that. That is entirely true. It's often I think a weaponized fact. I've heard the same thing about how within black communities in the US there isn't an overwhelming abolish the police sentiment in terms of, like, if you look at polling numbers or if you look at data where people are asking for it. That doesn't mean that these systems aren't fucked, and that doesn't mean that you can't advocate for their, people who advocate for just, like, we need to improve by, reforming, perhaps improve the training, something to that effect. We need to look at what we are hiring and spending nearly half of our city budgets on and why. And I would say that I want less crime, less, violent crime, less sexual assaults, less people robbing, less people breaking into stuff. And what are the solutions to that? Is it pouring half of your city budget into a police force, a racist police force, because I think it's pretty documented how racist they are now, that is going to consistently, request more money, request more arms, request more weaponization every single year? And are they getting results? Is there a one-to-one, every dollar you spend on the police is one less dollar in petty theft that you're going to save money on, or one less person that's going to be assaulted, or one less person that's going to be punched in the street or stabbed or shot or any of that kind of stuff? Or is there better ways to be spending all this fucking money? And there is. It turns out that if you reappropriate a lot of that money and funds into social programs that will reduce poverty, people who are unhoused, it can effectively reduce the amount of crime that your cities are experiencing, getting to the root of it all, reappropriating that money into effective strategies at lowering the amount of horrifying things that happen in society, rather than want to just go into a carceral state and magnify that. the more people as well who don't have homes as a result of, say, the cost of living going up, whether it be the cost of food, whether it be the cost of rent, whatever the case may be, well, that's going to create more working poor and working homeless folk. And as there's more people who are living on the streets, then there's going to be infinitely more opportunities for you to suddenly be exposed to harsh elements, getting sick frequently, and the use of drugs to self-medicate. It's going to, it's going to become more and more difficult for you to maintain a job, more and more difficult for you to maintain, a stable living environment as you have more and more difficulty affording life. And it's not a surprise that once things get worse and worse and worse, whether you lose your job, you lose your home, you might lose your friends, you might lose your family, you're going to feel probably pretty shitty, I imagine. I imagine there's probably a pretty strong correlation between losing your community or your family or your housing and all that kind of stuff and wanting to self-medicate in any way, shape, or form. Probably the most accessible drug would be alcohol, and then moving on from there from whatever you can find. And wow, suddenly there's a lot of people living on the streets who are also substance abusers. And what's going on here? And it seems like that number is going up in a lot of major cities. You got people like Elon Musk who say it's the woke mind virus that's doing it. Yes, it's because of the woke mind virus that has allowed all these people in San Francisco. He calls them the Walking Dead. He's like, look at that, the zombies that walk around, or how TYT like to vilify all the homeless in LA. And I live in an area of Vancouver where I am surrounded by people openly using drugs all the time. Every day when I leave my house, apartment, you'll see people on the street shooting up, smoking crack, doing all that kind of stuff. And those numbers sometimes look like they're increasing because there's more unhoused people in the city because the cost of rent has gone up astronomically, as the cost of living has gone up astronomically, as the cost of housing has gone up astronomically. And if you look at that, I get why the Janks and the Annas of the world see it and they're like, oh, gross, pores, using drugs, the criminals, the left want this. This is the liberalization of drug use, and this is all like, but this isn't true. It's that, like, you can look at the numbers. They speak for themselves. Do you want a carceral state? Do you want a world in which 1% of the population is in jail? Because that's the U.S. now. 1% of the U.S. population is in prison. That's an unbelievably high amount of prisoners, but it's not working. It's not like, stopping the problem. There's other things going on here. If you just keep telling the story, keep telling that lie that, hey, by the way, these are bad people. They've made poor life decisions. Some of them are immigrants. And so we have to be honest about that. And hey, as a result of it, they want to use drugs, that they can't help themselves, and they're just going to keep on using them. Well, a lot of them are addicted to drugs, yes, and this is going to be a complicated situation and an expensive one, but I challenge you. I think it is cheaper, just based on the data, for us, even if you don't want to look at this from a humane perspective, even if you don't care about that, your heart does not go out to these people. You would rather that they, simply aren't there, don't exist, out of sight, out of mind kind of shit, right? Even if that's the case, it's going to be cheaper to you as a taxpayer or as a homeowner who pays property taxes to house them. It's to do a housing first solution. Yes, you'd have to do a housing first solution in tandem with a whole bunch of other very expensive programs, such as you would have to provide medical services to them, addiction services to them. You'd have to provide, the opportunity for them to have, clean supplies, safe injection, that kind of stuff, and give them the option and the ability to be able to start, using less and less and or not using drugs at all, that kind of stuff. But all of that would be worth it in the long term. It would be cheaper to you than the cost to the current medical system, the cost to the police. And dare I say, to people who are, Blue Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter no matter what kind of folk, to those people as well, the police should not be counselors, marriage counselors, domestic abuse counselors. They shouldn't be psychiatrists or psychotherapists. They shouldn't be people who are responsible for dealing with people who have extreme mental health issues and being the first responders for that kind of stuff. These are not jobs that they're trained firsthand to do, or they have very minimal training in it, but they're still the ones who are usually going to be dispatched to deal with those kind of problems. We should be, again, reappropriating the funds that would be used to pay for the police to be the first responders to those kind of things to be used elsewhere on people who are trained or train people to do that kind of stuff. You're asking them to be so many things in society, and then you get the Joe Bidens of the world who will come forward and be like, you know, we're so proud of our police. They are so many things to society. You know, they are the hero that gets the cat out of the tree. They are the savior that prevents the domestic abuser from attacking another woman.
Clean up your room.
They are like. There are a lot of things that they shouldn't be, and it really sucks because it seems like there's a huge problem with, you know, the racism within the organizations themselves, but there's also a big problem in that they don't have training for a lot of these things. They don't know how to recognize the difference between someone who has bipolar disorder, someone who has schizophrenia, or someone who has neither. Someone who is a danger not to other people, but a danger to themselves. Someone who is screaming not because they are in the middle of you know, their third day on crystal meth and you know, they are experiencing psychosis, or someone who has a completely different underlying issue. That's to them, it's all the same. To them, it's you know, I have to be able to protect myself. This person could be a
Clean
threat.
up your room.
I don't want to be attacked firsthand right now, so I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then, unfortunately, this is just the way it goes.
There may well be very serious consequences that flows from that.
Consequences not just for officers, but potentially triggering a review of the investigations they were involved in. About cases involving domestic violence and sexual assault, the warrant says one officer called a complaint stupid, that the victim was a dumb Mexican C-word, and that he was going to write it off without investigating further.
Clean up your room.
And called another victim a dumb effing bitch, should have worn a mouthguard.
It's disgusting and unfortunately all too predictable.
This advocate says she knows of cases at this detachment she believes were mishandled.
We know that many RCMP members, we see that in our own work, harbor ideas that are not conducive to effective investigations and to caring about victims and survivors.
And while some experts say these actions don't represent most officers,
don't let the costumes fool you.
Clean up your
I know
room.
what you're all thinking. You're all like, oh, but Rocky, Bullwinkle, look how silly they are. A bunch of silly. Yes, but even if they look silly, that doesn't mean that they can't crack skulls. They can be silly and crack skulls. Those two things can happen simultaneously.
the force is struggling.
They're competing with other police agencies for good people, and sometimes they hire people that shouldn't be police officers.
Susanna, what's happening to the officers involved?
Well, 3 of the officers have been suspended since June of 2021. The Solicitor General couldn't say whether or not they are still being paid. But at this point, it appears they are the only ones facing a code of conduct hearing that was supposed to start this week, but has now been delayed until March of next year. But there are concerns that the evidence from those private chats won't be admissible because an RCMP officer who was supposed to submit a form to the judge about the evidence within 1 year said he, quote, forgot, and it didn't happen until 27 months later.
It's just, oh yeah, that thing.
Clean up your room.
The evidence of all the extreme racism of the RCMP officers. I forgot. Yeah. Oopsie. But, you know, better luck next time. Well, hopefully people find out about it on their own time, somehow. I bet you already drink coffee and love coffee, but you're probably worried if your coffee has blood in it. Not literal blood, but conflict zone blood. Did you want to buy coffee that is not only going to be delicious, it's going to arrive right on your door, it helps a little bit fund the serfs, and also it's end-to-end Indigenous owned. That's why I partnered with Solstice Coffee, and hey, if you order by going to serfscoffee.com, they even include a free sticker, which is pretty awesome. So there's really no reason to actually not replace the coffee you already drink with delicious ethical coffee. That's why you should check out serfscoffee.com.
Hey, if you'd like to unlock secret bonus episodes as well as uncensored content, go to patreon.com/theserfs. This show is produced by Anna Loves Riley, Arian McCarthy, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Hagbard Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimondi, Omni, Political Puppy, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demel, Travis McClinton, Trincell, Words Greenwood, with additional support coming from all of these amazing human beings right here.